Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we are going to discuss what is the thought process of a Grandmaster, how does top players think during a chess game, what are their assessment, how can they be so accurate whenever they calculate so hard, and in the end of the game, they have a accuracy of 99%. So by the end of the video, your accuracy is going to be increased by 100%. I can literally guarantee you guys that this video is simply going to be life-changing video for you if you really want to improve your game. So I don't want to waste any further time, so let's start. So we have this particular position on the board. Okay, so it's a game between Peter Leko versus his opponent. I think his opponent was Kharifman. So yeah, so here it's black to play and black just play the move rook to e8. So whenever a random position is given in front of you guys, so what is the way to calculate the position and try to evaluate the position that okay, this is better for white, this is better for black, or this is an equal position? How to calculate? So first, starting from scratch. So first of all, you should always try to count the material on the board that is present. For example, in this position, white is having 7 pawns in the position, black is also having 7 pawns in the position. Black is having 2 minor pieces, white is having 2 minor pieces, 2 rooks, and 1 queen. That's it. So material wise, the position is even. Now let's talk about general assessment. So first, we are going to talk about the king safety of both the kings. So currently, white king I think is a bit weaker because it is kind of a bit more exposed to these two particular diagonals. Yeah, and yeah, the king is kind of still in the middle, bit of middle. So I think the white king is a bit unsafe compared to the black king. Okay, black king looks a bit safe because black king is having his shelter pawns to cover the king, but okay, there could be some huge attack if white is able to launch some kind of g4 g5. So I would say white king is slightly a bit more weakened compared to the black king. Second, I would tell about the pawn assessment, like the pawn structure. So here, like any weaknesses that are present in the white's camp. So I think d5 pawn and the h4 pawn are a bit weak. Why? Because these pawns are not protected by the pawn, but these pawns are protected by the pieces. So these pawns can be a target in the future. And I think d3 square is also a bit weak because if the pawn would have been on c2, the king would have been much safer because the pawn covers the b3 and the d3 square. Okay, so now white is having these two pawns weaknesses and this particular square. Now if I talk about black pawn weaknesses, so black is having this e5 pawn a big weakness because it is only protected by the pieces but not the pawn. And second, I would say the c6 square is a weakness. Why? Because as the pawn is on b6, not on b7, which covers the c6 square, if I'm able to put my knight on c6, it would simply be a monster over that square. So I think overall, I think these squares are a bit weakened for black, personally speaking. And now talking about rooks. So I think both the rooks are doing the same job, and I think the queens are also matched up pretty equally. Both the rooks and the queen are not really doing much. Now talking about the key elements, which are the minor pieces, the knights and the bishop. So I think the knight on c5 is doing a pretty good job taking control of the center squares, also eyeing on some key areas of white's camp, whereas I think white's pieces are also doing pretty well. This particular knight, it can go to f5 or e4, can launch some crazy attack on the black king, and this knight attacks this pawn. Maybe it has the potential to jump on g5, try to put pressure on the black king. Okay, so I think every piece is doing fine job, but I think the only piece that black is, like the piece that is holding black back, is the bishop on f6. What is this piece even doing on f6? Okay, so the bishop on f6 is already blocked by his own pawn on e5. The bishop is not really having much space to go anywhere. So I think the bishop on f6 is kind of not happy. If I'm asking the bishop, how are you feeling? I think the bishop is going to say, I'm not at all feeling good. So what is the idea? Okay, so currently I think black bishop is feeling unsafe. Like that's not the best square for the bishop. Like for example, if the bishop would have been on c5 and the knight would have been on f6, the bishop would have done a great job attacking the queen and the pawn. And the knight on f6 would have done the same good job attacking this pawn, maybe having some ideas with pushing up the pawn, or maybe something like knight g4, attacking the queen and the pawn. Could have been an idea. So the c5 square deserves for the bishop, but there is knight. So definitely the bishop does not deserve on f6 because it is doing nothing. So third, coming to the third step after counting the material, after giving a general assessment, we're coming to the third step, which is what are the ideas of our opponent, trying to find ideas. What are the threats of our opponent? Like, are there any immediate threats happening up? So for example, in this position, if I'm looking from the black side in this position, so it's white to play, but if it would have been black to play, black's idea is to push the pawn to e4. Why? Because it gives black much more space in the center. The knight is having a better scope to jump on d3, as I said. And lastly, the bishop on f6, which is currently bad piece, would simply become a good piece. Why? Because it simply gets opened up. So I think it would have been a very good position, and I can already guarantee that this is already better for black if black is able to achieve e4. Like, I'm not really using any part of engine, but I'm just giving my own assessment. And now this is the idea of black. Black wants to achieve e4, attacking the knight, opening up his bishop, and then black's position would be simply phenomenal. And now talking about white's idea. What are the white's plan and threats? So white's idea, as I can say here, is to attack on the king side by playing g4 g5, getting the d rook on g1. I don't really see any immediate threats. Like, I can try to force the things by thinking of b4 moves, attacking the king, attacking the knight, but these moves are not really working up. I think black can already push the pawn, attack the knight, and as I said, the king is already weakened up a big much. So if white tries to capture the knight, black can also capture the, like, the king is kind of falling apart. It's already pretty feel unsafe for white king. So yeah, so currently white is not really threatening anything immediately because his idea is a bit long term. He wants to move the knight from g3 square, and idea is g4 g5 h5 and kind of launch a kingside attack. But that's a long term plan. So white is currently not really having any long term plan. Black is the one having the short term plan, which is to push the pawn to e4 and have a good position. So here, after doing all these things, like, we have already gained an idea what are the weaknesses, what are the strength on both the sides. So now it's white to play. So now the next idea, the next step, in order to find the best move here is to find out the candidate moves. So what can be the candidate move? So first of all, try to look for check. If checks are not working, try to look for captures. Captures are not working, try to look for some forcing moves. Like b4 is a forcing move, it attacks the knight, but eventually that's not really working up. But yeah, after if the forcing moves are not really working up, try to create some threats or try to make the moves that stops your opponent's threat. So for example, in this position, if it's white to play, my idea is to play g4 g5, black's idea is to play e5 e4, and as I said, white's pawn on d5 and h4 are a big weakness. I want to protect them. I want to remove my weaknesses. So okay, what can be the next step is to find the candidate move. What are the candidate moves? Candidate moves are the moves that pops up in your mind at the first glance. For example, I want to move my knight. I can play knight h5, I can play knight f5, I can play knight g4. Maybe I can just play rook to e1. Why rook e1? Because as I said, like, developing pieces is a basic fundamental that every chess player should follow, because in the end of the day, if you're not really finding any other good move, just keep on developing your pieces. So rook e1 is also can be a candidate move. And as I said, my king on c1 is a bit weak at the start, as I said. So I think moving the king makes sense. Moving the king from this diagonal, because as I said, this diagonal could be very painful. If the bishop somehow lands in this particular diagonal, it could be very unsafe for the white king. So I think king b1. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are five moves that comes to my mind. So these are the candidates move that comes into my mind. Now what I'm going to do here is trying to reduce these candidate moves into one or two possible moves that make sense to me. So okay, now let's try to make some sense. So for starting with knight to h5, if red play knight h5, black's idea is to just play e4. So let's say e4. Now my knight is attacked, so okay, so I can play knight g5. If I try to capture the bishop, because currently now the bishop is strong, but at the first glance, like at the start, the bishop was weak. So if I just go into this particular position, like after knight d4, because the knight was hanging, now black can even play knight d3 check, capture this pawn, because f2 pawn is a weakness now. And the main weakness that was of black, the bishop on f6, is simply removed. And I think the position is at least better for black. It's like black basically has solved all his problems. Like the e4 pawn could be a weakness, but currently it's a strong pawn. And currently the f2 pawn is a backward pawn. Black can easily give a check and can capture a pawn. Black is already better. So already knight h5 doesn't make any sense. Okay, if I try to play something like knight to f5, I think knight f5 still black can simply push the pawn. And now the knight is once again attacked. I have to move the knight, and I think can black simply capture the pawn? Because there are no good discoveries in the position, and I think black is just better. Black is a pawn up now. His pieces are kind of well centralized. The bishop is opened up, and black is once again facing no problem. So going back a bit, knight f5 is also not working. So for example, if I try to play a move like rook e1, just developing my pieces. Okay, okay, e4 in this position. Okay, e4, it attacks my knight. I have to move my knight. Okay, so let me play knight to d4. First of all, I can't capture because black can simply capture, and I can't capture because the knight is protecting the rook and queen is a much powerful piece than the rook. So I have to move my knight, and now I think black can just went on to capture the pawn. As I said, the pawn was weak, right? So black simply captured the pawn, and now black's idea is to take this diagonal advantage by playing bishop g5 and winning my queen. So this is what black idea is. So going back a bit, and so rook e1 is absolutely a mess. So now coming to a move like king to b1, just moving the king. I'm trying to remove my weaknesses, but here once again black can just focus on pushing his pawn. I have to move my knight. I can also play knight to g5. Actually, it attacks the pawn, and if black tries to take over here, now black has removed his problematic piece, but now in the exchange I have gotten some attack on the king side. But instead black can just play h6, attacking my knight, takes, and black can just take the pawn. And after g3 f5, I think the knight is hanging. Okay, this is a fine position. White is a pawn up. Yeah, this is I think a playable position, but okay, this is a move that makes a good sense. So now coming to the final move, discussing the final move, can I play something like knight to e4 in the position? What is the idea now? The idea here is, first of all, I'm threatening to play g4 g5, and second idea here is I'm trying to stop black from pushing his pawn. Now black can't really push his pawn from the e5 square, and now I'm also at the same time threatening to play g4 g5. And here, as I said, the knight on c5 is a good piece, but the bishop is on f6 is a bad piece. So after knight e4, my idea here is to trade off the knights, and now then I would be having a good piece versus a bad piece. And now with my idea of g4, g5 coming up, the position is already crushing. And after knight e4, black is, I think, having two options. Black can either go for taking the knight, or he can simply go back. But always, like, the defensive resource should be at the last. Always try to look for counterattacks. If only counterattacks are not working up, then only look for defensive moves. So after knight e4, for example, if I don't really see anything, okay, knight e4 takes, queen comes to d6, because I don't really find any other good move. Black's idea could be to get the rook into the game, but g4, king moves, the rook comes into the game, and the position already looks pretty healthy for white. I don't really see any counterplay from the black side. Going back a bit, if black tries to play something like knight to d7, going back with his 9, yeah, maybe just d6, because as I said, the e4 pawn, the d5 pawn was weak, so I'm trying to remove my weaknesses by trading off the weakness with the c7 pawn, and I'm trying to open up my rook. With the same idea of g4 g5 coming up, the position is very strong for white. White is already better. So yeah, black has to take, and this is already better for white, as I said. So yeah, these are the two moves that comes into my mind. By making a final conclusion, I've came to my decision that knight e4 and king b1 are the two good moves, and I'm going to play the move knight to e4 because, as I said, knight e4 looks a bit more promising compared to the king b1. King b1 is a good move, but whenever you see a good move, try to look for a better one. Knight e4 is the best move. Why? Because it simply nullifies the bishop on f6. It makes the piece completely bad. White's completely winning. That's it. So I think, guys, this is the thought process of a grandmaster. This is how they evaluate a position. This is how they find a good move. This is the way they find a good move, candidate move, and eventually the best move. This is, I think, grandmasters have done this so much consciously that this has become a part of their subconscious mind. But as we, in the lower level, the players do not think about this so much. So this is not really a part of their subconscious mind. So they have to keep thinking of, like, they have to keep counting like this. Because whenever they stop counting, they make a move that doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know, like making a random move. Like, for example, at the place of knight e4, let me play c4. But that doesn't make any sense. You're protecting the pawn, but push. The bishop is a monster now. So yeah, this is the difference between a grandmaster thinking versus a beginner or an intermediate or an advanced player. So I think if you focus on these steps which we discussed, first count the material, then take the general assessment of the situations, king safety, comparing the pieces, like if the pieces are on good squares or not. Look for immediate threats. Are your opponent threatening anything or not? Look out for weaknesses, your opponent weaknesses. And fifth one, how are you going to solve your problems? Trying to find the candidate moves in the position. Once you find the candidate moves, do a bit of research. Try to go a bit deeper into the lines, and eventually you're going to come with one or two moves, and you're going to play better chess, increase your accuracy, and have a fantastic position. So I think this is how you can play and improve your game. If this video helped you to improve your game and knowledge of chess, make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone, and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you're new to our channel. I'm going to come up with these more interesting videos like this. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching OneShot Chess. Bye bye.